Hello, well, I am joined today by the newly elected leader of Britain's main opposition party, that's New Labour, and it is, of course, Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn, thank you so much for giving Tillerson the time today. I want to start off by asking a bit about your critics. Now, your critics are questioning your electability. It's an almost daily offensive on behalf of British media groups against both your politics, but also your person, and even members of the Labour Party, within the Labour Party, are now voicing concerns. They feel the party's split down the middle.
We've just come through a big election campaign within the Labour Party. We've had an electorate within the party of 550,000 people, well over 500,000, which is the biggest ever electorate for a party election process in Britain. And Labour Party membership has gone up a great deal, both before this campaign started and, interestingly, for the week after I was elected, the party membership was increasing by 10,000 every day. Now, the process was that Labour unfortunately lost the election in May. There is a Conservative government with a small majority in Parliament. The former leader of the party, Ed Miliband, resigned after the election and a new process was called. And I was nominated eventually as one of the candidates with great difficulty because the majority of the members of Parliament who do control the nominating process did not want me as a candidate, but a group of 35 eventually nominated me, and so I became a candidate. My position was that I'm against the economic strategy of the government and against the economic policies that the Labour Party had put forward in the general election campaign on austerity. So I was standing on an anti-austerity platform, and we've had a very, very thorough election campaign. It's lasted for 3 months, and I spoke at 100 events all over Britain, England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and put forward an anti-austerity message. With each meeting we did, the audiences got bigger. They were interested in this kind of inclusive politics of opposing what the government is doing, but also putting forward policy ideas and policy statements that were very different in many ways. And also, I don't get involved in personal abuse. I don't care what abuse is thrown at me. I don't reply, and I never do any personal abuse of anybody. It's solely politically based activities. And that has had a big response. We've now, at the end of our campaign, had 17,000 people registered as volunteers in our campaign, having started with none in the middle of June. June the 15th, we had nothing. We had no members, we had no supporters, we had nothing. We just had my name on the ballot paper. And by the end of the campaign, we had a huge team working very hard, and I appeared at 100 events all over Britain, and we had 17,000 volunteers. The voting was done either online or by post, and at the end I received 251,000 votes, nearly 200,000 more than any other candidate. I got 59% of the vote on the final count. And so my mandate comes from the members and supporters of the Labour Party. The members of the Parliamentary Party are all obviously elected as parliamentarians. Most did not vote for me, and therefore I have this position where I'm expected to appoint what's called a shadow cabinet. This is a parallel government in a sense, and I've managed to do that. And as I said all through the campaign, I would appoint people from differing political backgrounds and differing views. So it's a very broad range of opinion that's there. But the important thing is the mandate I've got is for a different way of doing politics, is for democratic inclusion, is for open policy making, is for developing ideas from the grassroots, and it's gained a fantastic response. Our audiences were either young people, a lot of them under 25 or 30, or much older people who'd become disillusioned with British politics, particularly after the invasion of Iraq, and now saw an opportunity for something different. My background: I was a trade union organiser before I became a Member of Parliament, and in Parliament I've concentrated on representing my community, but also concentrated on human rights and peace issues, and I was chair of the Stop the War Coalition and also vice chair of the campaign for nuclear disarmament. So my background is very much international peace, justice and human rights. And I'm now the leader of the party. Fascinating position to be in, exciting, really looking forward to it. And this weekend we've got our Labour Party conference where we'll be beginning to develop some policy ideas, and I'm very excited by it all, particularly the new members that have come into our party.
Definitely, definitely. Under your leadership, might Labour reconsider its relationship with the SNP, with the Greens? Some people are thinking maybe an option for politics here in Britain is this kind of cross-party alliance on the left. What do you think about that?
In Parliament, we will cooperate with all other parties to try to defeat two pieces of legislation that are very bad the government have brought forward. The first one is the Trade Union Reform Bill, which is all about preventing trade unions having a political voice, funding political parties or being active in politics. The second is the Welfare Reform Bill, which is about reducing the benefits available to large families, reducing the benefits available to people that are in desperate need. They're very nasty, very bad measures, very bad laws. We'll be voting against them, and we will also be working with Scottish Nationalists, the Green MP and any other opposition party, such as Plaid Cymru, the Welsh National Party, as well as the Social Democratic and Labour Party of Northern Ireland. As to a wider coalition, I don't think that's very likely, but I do think that British politics has changed a great deal, and many young people are now looking to join the Labour Party and be involved in it because of the style of campaigning that we're doing.
To what extent do you think your victory as Labour leader, or more precisely, the triumph of the anti-austerity message as that has broken through into mainstream British politics, to what extent is that related to the rise of Syriza in Greece and Podemos in Spain?
There's been a much more intense debate about austerity following the whole issue of Greeks and the problems in Greece, and the victory that Syriza had in the January election and the recent re-election of them. But also many people are appalled by the way the European Union has treated Greece, and just as much as they're appalled at the very high levels of unemployment, particularly youth unemployment in Spain, which is now, I think, 50%. And so that has changed the atmosphere. And the interesting thing is that the main left parties across Europe have all lost support and lost members. It's Labour that's gained support and gained members recently. And in part, I think that's because the Labour Party has become a home to a much more radical tradition than it used to be. And we'll see what happens, but I'm excited by it and excited by the possibilities of real change.
Yeah. And also thinking again, sorry about this, Syriza and Podemos, these are parties that want to be part of the EU, but they want to see reform within the EU. They want to see a radical change. I mean, there's a lot of criticism. You mentioned it, how the EU treated Greece, the Greek bailout, and so many feel that they are bullied by an economic policy decided by Brussels and Germany. And so they want to see reform within the EU. Would you like to see reform within the EU, and what kind of EU would you like to see?
Look, the EU is probably a subject of more intense debate in Britain than almost any other European country. There is a significant degree of opposition to the European Union, usually from quite a nationalist, almost xenophobic perspective, but also from a left position as well. The two do not cooperate at all. They're different forms of criticism. Within the Labour Party and the trade unions, there are serious concerns. One, about the treatment of Greece, the terms of the bailout, the imposition of pension changes and other changes on Greece are seen as very unfair, and they are very unfair. Secondly, is the question of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership that's being negotiated by the European Union and the USA, which will damage working conditions all across Europe and probably in some parts of the USA. And the third one is workers' rights. At the moment, we have a European social chapter, we have working time directive, we have quite a lot of European directives that have been helpful in working conditions. The Conservative government wants to sign away a lot of those, wants to have a Europe that is only a market Europe rather than a popular Europe, our strategy is that we will make demands for good working conditions all across Europe, for observance of the International Labour Organization conventions and demands, respect for the European Convention on Human Rights and the Human Rights Act in Britain, which is only partly an EU responsibility, and we want a Europe of decency and social solidarity, environmental protection, and not one of solely free market economics. And so there is a debate going on there. And at our conference next week, I'm sure the issue will be debated again. What unites the party and unites everyone is the demand for decent working standards and working conditions all across Europe. Eastern European workers migrate around Europe, British workers migrate around Europe. Often, those that come from the poorer countries in Eastern Europe are grossly exploited in Western Europe, in France, in Germany, in Belgium, Netherlands, and in Britain, and that is something that's got to stop. We want all workers treated properly, all workers paid at the very least the minimum wage, all workers entitled to the same level of protection. That is a big debate, but we are there saying there has to be a universality of conditions.
Now, the British government now is going to try and push for another debate on further military intervention in Syria, tying it all up really with the refugee crisis, blaming it on Bashar al-Assad. What I want to ask you is, firstly, what is your stance on this as an option to intervene in Syria? And secondly, is this link, Bashar al-Assad with the refugee crisis, too tedious? Surely there are more actors involved.
There is a real refugee crisis in Europe. There's a refugee crisis around the world. There are now more refugees around the world than there ever been in recorded history. More utterly desperate people fleeing from environmental disaster, fleeing from poverty, fleeing from oppression, or fleeing from war. There are huge refugee camps in Lebanon and in Jordan, and the whole region is dominated by refugee camps, including those in Libya. There are migrants, desperate people trying to cross the Mediterranean, many of whom have lost their lives in the process, many more trying to get through Turkey and Greece into Western Europe. Interestingly, the public opinion has changed across Europe, and Germany, to its credit, has taken hundreds of thousands of refugees. Britain has taken very few, and many of us are demanding that Britain take part in an EU programme to bring more refugees to Britain, to give them a place of safety and let them settle down, live and work here and contribute to our society. It's important that we have two responses to this. One is the humanitarian response to those in need, and I do praise the government for at least putting a great deal of money into the refugee camps in Lebanon. I condemn the government for not allowing more refugees into Britain. In my community, for example, we're collecting food and clothing to take to the refugee camp in Calais as an act of solidarity, and we have a group of people go there every week and take it by car and ferry to Calais. As to the issue in Syria, which in part is the source of this flow of refugees, it's important to remember that all wars start from the failure of politics. All wars are ultimately ended by the re-engagement of politics. Think of the war in Colombia. It's gone on for as many years as I can remember. Ultimately, a peace process came about by political action. Political action has to be taken in the Middle East. Therefore, a conference urgently called of all the countries in the region, including Russia and Iran, as well as the European Union, the USA, Turkey, has to happen to stop the flow of arms to ISIL, stop the flow of money to ISIL, and to try and bring about some future. At the moment, the options that we're being told by the military are to bomb. Bombing will kill people, will destroy infrastructure, and ultimately will probably lead to more people, not less people, joining ISIL. All the experience so far of all the bombing that's happened in Syria on ISIL targets has been an increase in people wanting to go there and join ISIL. There has to be a different way of doing things.
But if we want to attack ISIL, if we want to attack ISIS, how can you, as a leader of a British political party, do that when in fact many people are saying there's so many ties that link Britain with these rebel groups in the Middle East, that it's all a spillover, in fact, from Western foreign policy. to challenge that is going to be difficult.
Western foreign policy has a lot to answer for. A lot to answer for since the First World War on the borders in the region and the makeup of those states. But it also has a lot to answer for the refugee flows that came out of Iraq and other countries, some of which ended up in Syria, and the growth of extremist forces, partly because of the attacks on Iraq. There were no jihadist groups in Iraq prior to the invasion in 2003. And so we have to think more differently about Western foreign policy. I am against the bombing and I'm against a military intervention. I'm for a humanitarian intervention. I'm for a political development and a political solution in the area, and also look at the quantities and quality of arms that are being sold to various countries in the region and where they actually end up.
But do you think the British establishment is ready for a more pacifist stance abroad? Also considering the British alliance with countries such as Saudi Arabia, massive arms dealer, also now just been declared head of the United Nations Council of Human Rights. There's a lot to go against. We're talking about historical alliances here, and also this week or last, someone from here, the British military, threatened mutiny if you ever were to be leader of this country, just only for having this pacifist stance. How are you going to negotiate with this system?
Well, yes, there is a British military tradition, obviously, and this has been traditionally quite a militarised kind of society. That all of that is true, but also the perceptions and attitudes and activities of the army have changed as well. I'll give you an example. Last week, just after my first Prime Minister's Question Time, we had a military parade outside Parliament, and it was very impressive. There were about 1,000 people, I think, on it altogether, maybe a bit less than that. They were soldiers, they were Navy, they were Air Force people, and they'd all been to West Africa to support the campaign against Ebola. They'd all taken part in the eradication of Ebola. There were medical corps people and others, and a lot of civilian workers that came with them, all came to Parliament together, and we said thank you to them. That is an example of an army doing something very good. Very capable, very good engineers, very good logistics people, and they helped to deal with the Ebola crisis. Now, dealing with a crisis is important. The Italian Navy, for example, has vessels that can be converted very quickly into desalination plants or to hospital ships. Militaries can have lots of roles around the world in dealing with humanitarian crises and disasters. I see that as an important role. I see supporting UN peacekeeping operations as an important role. Now, are my views held by a wide section of the military? Probably not, but you would be surprised the number of military generals and others that would say, well, actually, this is an important way forward on this, and when I raise the issue of nuclear weapons, there's quite a lot who agree with me.
And what about supporting resistance movements such as the PKK in Kurdistan? I mean, these are people who are fighting ISIS, but who aren't really getting much international support. Would you be interested in helping these people, at least publicly in word, shedding a bit of limelight on this?
I have a large number of Kurdish people in the community I represent in Parliament, and they come from Turkey as well as from Iran and Iraq, but the largest number are from Turkey. And it's up to Britain and the other Western European countries to put real pressure on Turkey for its discrimination against the Kurdish people, for the rights of Kurdish people, and to bring about a political settlement in Turkey that respects them. That was happening, that was going quite well actually, until the crisis in Syria, when the Turkish government seemed to be giving limited support and help to the Kurdish people. I think this point about the regional conference is an important one, and I would certainly give political support to the Kurdish people and their right to their own identity, language and their determination of the future.
Your first Prime Minister Question Time, you elicited questions from the general public. And for many, in fact, this was a reference to more participatory forms of democracy, as experienced in many progressive countries in Latin America. Now, to what extent do you look outwards, do you take inspiration from other models of democracy outside of Europe?
Well, Britain is a very long-established parliamentary system. We've had continuous parliamentary government for 800 years in Britain. It's not a perfect democracy. We don't have an elected upper chamber, for example, and so there are changes that are needed. And I have had the good fortune of travelling a great deal in my life. I've been to over 70 countries around the world, and you look at people doing things differently. You look at popular movements, you look at popular movements in Latin America, you look at that form of democracy. Democracy isn't just about electing somebody to a parliamentary or public office position. It's also about independent access to justice. It's also about the rights of free speech. It's also about the right to know what is going on. And I think that policy making in Britain by political parties as well as by government as a whole is too narrow, too elitist, and in my campaign to be leader of this party, I said that I wanted to be leader of the party in order to energise and democratise the party, put the policy making powers back to those on the ground rather than retain them from those at the top. It's very exciting. We can all learn lessons from lots of places, and I'm enthused by that. So I thought, first Prime Minister's Question Time, I'll ask the public for a response. I only asked 2 days before Prime Minister's Question Time came up. I had 50,000 responses of questions I should ask the Prime Minister, and I selected 3 subject areas and asked questions on those, and that's generally the way I intend to do it in the future. And it's different, and it meant that instead of being a theatre of 2 men shouting at each other, which is completely incomprehensible to the majority of the public, we had a much more serious adult discussion, and that's a first victory in this election process.
Definitely. Well, it was definitely very refreshing to watch. And what exactly are your ties with Latin America? Because out there people have been following your political career, but also more now this rise to become the leader of the Labour Party. What are your ties with Latin America?
I first went to Latin America when I was 18, 19. I was living in the Caribbean, and I took a sailing boat around the Caribbean, and then a fishing boat trip to Guyana, and I stayed in Guyana for a bit, and then went overland from Guyana through Suriname and French Guiana, La Guyane Française, to Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, Paraguay, Peru, and then eventually made my way back to Buenos Aires and got a ride home on a cargo ship which dropped me in France. I did this all on my own, just working about, looking up things and listening to people. I was fascinated by the history, fascinated by the pre-Spanish history, by the indigenous cultures, by the indigenous languages, and listening to people speaking Quechua and Aymara, and looking at the incredible civilizations that were there before the Spanish arrived. I've been in Mexico and Central America a great deal. I was first in Nicaragua in 1983 and went there several times, and Honduras and other countries. So I'm fascinated by the history. My favorite book is Eduardo Galeano, The Open Veins of Latin America. It's a most amazing work, and I was so sad when he died last year. Yeah. And so my links go back a long way. And in Britain, I'm the chair of the All-Party Mexico group, as well as of the All-Party Latin America group. And it's been my privilege to visit many countries in Latin America and try and build up that relationship. There's also a big Latin American community in London, which I'm very proud of and very well connected to. And they have an annual Latin American Awards ceremony. And I'm usually presenting the Human Rights Award for the Latin American community. So I've got a lot of contact, a lot of friendships there.
Might Britain's ties with Latin America change if you were to become leader of Great Britain?
Yes, we would want to develop the closest possible ties, recognise the social advances that have been made, recognise the differing trade arrangements that exist in Latin America, where the Alba Pact countries have a different way of doing things to the, for example, the NAFTA arrangement that Mexico is in with the USA, but also improving trade and cultural ties throughout Latin America. We've got a lot to learn. There are also skills and things in Britain that can be exported to Latin America. Britain has great skills in railways. After all, it was British engineers that built most of the railways in Latin America. So there's things to be done there. But above all, it's our children understanding that history is everywhere. It's every continent, it's every country, and there's civilizations that have been before. And learning about that is actually what brings about better understanding in the world and ultimately brings about peace.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
So that was it, the interview for Dile Sur with Jeremy Corbyn, the new leader of New Labour here in
not New
Britain.
Labour, the Labour Party.
Are you taking back the Labour
I am
Party?
taking back. It is the Labour Party. It's not called New Labour anymore.
Fantastic. Well, that's exciting news. So the leader of the Labour Party. Great. Thank you.
I've spent my life in the Labour Party as a socialist, and I'm proud to be in the Labour Party, and proud equally to be a socialist.
Fantastic. Well, that's it. I'm Stephanie Kennedy for Dile Sur.